Hi folks, welcome back to the second in our two-part series for this course where we're looking at the digital blooms taxonomy. And in the first video we looked at the first three levels of blooms, the remembering, understanding and applying. And we saw how we could use technology to target each of those levels and how students could think on different levels just by using different technology tools in different ways. So for this video we're going to look at the higher order skills, higher order knowledge that students can demonstrate. And we're starting with analysing. And so according to Churches, analysing really includes things like comparing, organising, deconstructing, attributing, outlining, and so on, breaking material or concepts into parts, determining how the parts relate or interrelate with one another, or to an overall structure of or purpose. So we can see that there's analysis is quite complicated. It's getting quite difficult by contrast to just say remembering. And so the technology tools that we use for this need to reflect that. And I wanted to look particularly because analysing is often done in terms of text, but it's often good to look at how you can analyse something visually. We talk about visual literacy all the time as your ability to decode or deconstruct images. So let's have a think about what that might mean if we're using technology for that purpose. So the first one I wanted to demonstrate here is a website that's been around for quite a long time called Flickr. And Flickr actually, for quite some time now, has enabled a feature called Flickr annotations. Sometimes you could also call this notes as well. And there's been some great examples of how you can use Flickr to annotate images. Some people say it's possibly the greatest feature of the website. And if I just click on an example just so that you can see. So here's an example of an image within Flickr, and you can see what people have done is to basically drag text boxes to highlight certain parts of that image and then to annotate them as notes. And so this is a very simple example, but there's other examples that you can Google where they've done quite complicated visual images like Renaissance paintings, for example, and being able to annotate everything from the vectors, the lighting, darkness, the figures, the items in a painting, and so on, and being able to just annotate and really critically deconstruct what's going on in the image. Now with Flickr, it's relatively easy to do that, and I'm just going to demonstrate that now with my Flickr account. You do need to sign up to Flickr if you want to have images that you can then annotate, but it's not that hard to do. Once you've signed up and you've added an image or images into your Flickr account, you can just basically go ahead and annotate them. So you can see here I've got quite a few, and this one here is an interesting one just as a little comical example of a friend of mine who basically was out there talking to an ostrich in New Zealand when we visited. And this is a really interesting one to basically annotate because you know, there's so much that's going on in this image. You can see, really, it's it says so much in so many ways. And so to annotate this image, it's actually quite easy to do. It's basically as easy as dragging a text box and then adding a note. So that process again, just dragging the text box there and adding the note. And you could do that on even a small part of the image, and make a point about the fact that the animal appears to be, what could we say, scowling? Yeah, something like that. Or the animal appears to be angry. I'll go with that. And basically start annotating. These poplars are a feature, these common feature of many New Zealand. Okay, and you can see how easy it is to then just annotate that. And as you go over the image then, that is displayed. So here's my friend sort of outstretched hand of friendship, or something more menacing. And once you've just done that, we can see how easy it is to annotate each feature of the image. And of course, some images really need to be deconstructed. This one is just a comical example, but there's so much to deconstruct here. The fact that Brendan is sort of leaning in towards the animal, and the animal seems to be leaning in towards him, but we don't quite know if it's a sort of a friendship that's being established, or is it just a more of a threatening environment where the animal feels threatened, so he's going to sort of lurch forward and look menacing to try to scare off the human. But yeah, there's lots that we could do with this kind of image, and other images like that, even more detailed ones. So you can see that's a really good way of just using a website like Flickr. You don't necessarily have to use Flickr. Another website that you could use for this purpose, and I'm just going to get the original size of this. I'm going to download it to my desktop. And another website that you could use for this purpose is Google Drawing, which we've looked at before in other courses. Okay, and it's just drawings.google.com, and you will need to have your Google account ready. So if you don't have a Google account, you'll need to sign up for one. But Google Drawings is quite good in that you can very easily add images in, and I'm just going to upload one from my computer. And here's the image that we've downloaded from Flickr. Now I can increase the canvas size of this image so that I give myself extra room for the annotation. So I might actually start by making it much wider. And that might even be enough if I just center the image now, like so. I can start to add text boxes this way. And so that's as easy as basically picking the color. And sometimes if you're annotating over the top of an image like this, it can be quite helpful to simply choose a color that's likely to work quite well. So in this case, probably a bright yellow. And you can experiment around with this. And so in this case, it hasn't worked out quite well with that image. So I could experiment with putting a text highlighting area, or I could even color in the whole text box. Or even insert some shapes and things behind it. I could, of course, move it over here and just change the font back to black. And then simply insert some arrows just by pointing to certain parts. And of course I can increase the thickness of the arrow if I want to. And of course, if I wanted to, I can actually put a border around the text box. So you can see it's reasonably easy to do this in a website like Google Drawings. Why I do like Google Drawings is the ability to do this collaboratively, so that you could easily set this image up and then have groups of, say, 4 students annotating different aspects of the image. So we could pick, in this case, themes that are in the image, like friendship versus antipathy, for example, could be one theme that we explore. Another theme we could explore is something like the peaceful countryside, or the joys of traveling, or the unexpected. And we could have students actually annotate aspects of the image that they identify reflecting that particular theme that they've been given. So you can see it's a really great way of looking at visual literacy, and using websites like Flickr is a really good start, because you can just annotate straight within as soon as you've uploaded the image. But also Google Drawings is really good as well for being able to do much the same thing, but more collaboratively too. So having a drawing that gets shared with 2 or more students so that they can work on it at the same time. And this is a great way to analyse. So hopefully you found that helpful. Now, if we go back to the taxonomy, we're getting quite high order at this stage. And the next stage that we're looking at is, of course, evaluating. Now, evaluating is where it gets really quite advanced. So we're checking, hypothesizing, critiquing, experimenting, judging, testing, monitoring, detecting, making judgments based on criteria and standards through checking and critiquing. Now, an example of this, we're going to work now with text as a point of difference with the last activity, and we're going to have a look at Google Docs and a strategy that I like to call write on the reading. Now, I'm just going to show you a typical write on the reading style activity. You're probably familiar with this. You don't need to be able to read this image. It's just to demonstrate the approach. Here we have a passage of text about the feudal system, and in essentially pen and paper, you can see what's happened is that the person has written on the reading. So they've written all sorts of questions, they've flagged things that they disagree with, they've highlighted information where there is not enough information, and said, this is not enough to be able to make a judgment. They've made a judgment about the historical fact of, the feudal system and what that meant. And they've really fully critiqued the feudal system, but also the presentation of the feudal system in this particular passage. So this is, as you say, a pen and paper activity, and you've probably done something like this before when you've instructed your students to read and evaluate a text. Now, the great thing about technology is this kind of thing is really easy to do using current tools that we have at our disposal. So I'm going to show you, this one is an example of a write on the reading activity that you can do using Google Docs. And here we have basically a text here that's a chapter taken from a book called Literacy is Not Enough, and the chapter is Creativity Fluency, from a book by Lee Crockett. And we've just basically taken the chapter because what we wanted to do was to have teachers really critique the argument. What's going on in this text? What good points does it make? Where does it fall short? What else needs to be considered? What points did the teachers disagree with? And so we did this as a write on the reading activity where we instructed teachers to use highlights and comments to engage with the text. And you can see we've got a point being made here by Patricia, saying teaching creativity is the most fun thing to do in the classroom. So why aren't teachers doing it more? And I've responded to that saying, very true. I find that I really have to allow more time for my own creativity. It feels wrong in a way, but ultimately makes me a much better teacher. And so we can see going down here, we get sort of sections of the text that have been highlighted, and then people making comments on that. So this is a really great way to engage with evaluation skills. But what really, I guess, makes it more interesting from a traditional write on the reading style activity is that we don't just have an individual engaging with the argument and evaluating it. We have a whole set of individuals. So in this case, we had 20 teachers going through, and they were making comments, and then people were actually responding to those comments. So it became this quite high-level evaluation activity, but one where there was sort of collaboration in the process, so people were able to really learn from one another, as well as learn from the text, as well as really going quite deeply in their evaluation skills. So you can see here, and these thoughtful, insightful comments that people have made going down demonstrate the level of thinking that they're doing at this level 5 Digital Bloom's evaluation stage. Something as simple as a write on the reading task. So to get started with this, it's really easy. It's just a Google Doc, and then you add your text, and then you need to share that document with the individuals. And so we've done, in this case, the sharing setting being anyone with a link can comment. And so with that link, we're able to send that out to people, and they're able to click on that, access that Google Doc with the chapter, and begin to highlight and comment. And it's as simple as that, and yet as sophisticated as that. So that's really level 5 of Bloom's, evaluating and really getting advanced high-level thinking skills about an argument in this case. And then we get to, of course, level 6, which is really way, way up there. We're getting up to the creativity stage. Students are creating. And so there are lots and lots and lots of ways that students can go about creating. It's really hard to cover them all. There's no possible way that we can. Digital creativity is very diverse, and we only have to, look at, say, a YouTube page to get a sense of the different approaches that people are making to creating things using digital tools. So here are some examples of key terms: designing, constructing, planning, producing, inventing, devising, and making. Now, we're putting elements together to form a coherent or a functional whole, reorganizing elements into a new pattern or structure through generating, planning, and producing. I want to show you a slightly unusual example of this. We're going to look at working with sound. So you see there's a little bit of a logic to what I've just been showing you. For the analysing stage, I wanted to show you working with imagery and visual images and visual representation and visual literacy by using visual annotation tools. For the evaluation stage, we looked at working with text, engaging with an argument. For creating, as I say, there's lots of ways of doing that, but how about if we look at creating with sound? What does that look like? How would we go about doing that? Why would we do that? Now, creating with sound is a really interesting exercise. If you've got any friends that work in radio, for example, they'll tell you that working with sound is a really, really complicated business. It's really quite a high-level set of creativity skills that you need to create something with sound. And what would it mean to, say, create a story using just sounds? There's a word for this, and people often call such things soundscapes, where you have essentially something that's happening that's conveyed through a series of sounds that are sequenced together into some kind of a story, some kind of a digital story, if we're using digital tools. Now, there's actually a very simple and very much free tool that allows you to do this that you might be familiar with. It's called Audacity. And I'll show you how to get it. It's just Audacity in a Google search, which will take you to the website. It's a free open source cross-platform audio editing tool. And you can just go download. And once again, you're going to get the Windows installer. So you're going to go to the Audacity 2.3.3 installer if you're using Windows. There are other versions for Linux and Mac OS. You can see them listed there. And you're just going to download, in my case, the Windows installer. And that will download, and you will install that, and then you'll have Audacity running on your computer. It works offline, so it doesn't need an internet connection at all to do this, and yet what it's capable of doing is amazing. Now, obviously we're working with sound, and Audacity will let you record sounds, and that's a really good way to go if you want to record sounds. However, if we're working with a soundscape, we may well be wanting sounds that we don't have on hand. Let's say, for example, we wanted to start our story in a farmyard and get some sounds from a typical farmyard. How would we do that? How would we get those sounds in? And how would we sequence those sounds into some kind of a story? Well, there happens to be a really good free website called freesound.org, which I highly recommend. It's completely free. Every sound on it is absolutely free. It's run through donations, and you can sign up for it. It is good to sign in because you can then download your sounds. You just sign up for a free account. There's no money involved at all. And then you get to search sounds. So, for example, if I was searching for a farmyard sort of sound, I might start with a cow. And here's a cow. Great. I could also try this one if I prefer. That looks like there's two. Like a low isn't it? So I could get that sound, and now I'm going to pause that, and I'm going to go into the sound file, and I just click download. And I've actually downloaded a bunch of sounds already into a folder on my desktop called Free Sound, just to demonstrate. Other sounds that I might like, for example, let's say peaceful music. And because I might want to have peaceful music going with my farmyard soundscape. So there's one example of one. I can go into that and I can hit download. I might want to have things like birds, because you're probably going to hear those. There's birds in spring in Scotland. And I might want to have something like running water, for example. And so you can start to get sounds. You can see how easy it is. And that looks good. I'm going to download that one. And you'll see I've downloaded a bunch of other ones too. Now, with my story, I might decide that after this sort of wonderful, peaceful start to the story, something eerie is going to happen. So I might even look for something like scary music, for example. And here's some scary violins. Or I might decide that I want a scary piano. Or I might decide that I want sort of something more suspenseful. So I can grab that one. And of course you can get as many sounds as you like. And I'm just going to download that one. And I've collected quite a few sounds here that are just going to be downloading in the background. Now, once I've got these sounds together, and as I mentioned, I've got them sitting in a folder on my desktop, I'm going to put them into Audacity and start to think about this soundscape as a story. And I might actually pay to have the story storyboarded in the first instance. At this stage, I'm not really sure what's happening in my story. I know that it's going to start in a farmyard, and then there's something eerie going to happen. So I might actually want to fully plan out the story before I go ahead and do that. But in this case, I'm just going to demonstrate how you would make a start on this. Now, as far as the sounds go, I'm just going to open up my free sound folder here. And I've got quite a few good quality sounds here. I'm just going to drag the name across. So I've got some good ones. I've got the cat, there's the cow. I've got child yelling. I've got the spooky sound. I've got the peaceful music. So I'm going to add these to Audacity. So you can see here, there's my Audacity, and I'm going to drag my peaceful melody into Audacity. In it goes. And I can even just shrink it down because I'm going to need to have a little bit more space here. And if I can start playing that, you can see there it is. And then I can start adding my other sounds in. So for example, I might want to put my cow in. And let's have a listen to that. So I'm going to go back. I've got my cow in there. I might also decide that I want to I had another cow, didn't I? Let's get the other cows in. And I might decide that, well, actually I don't want all these cows happening at the same time. I would much rather have them moved around a bit, so I can get my moving tool and move my other cows across a bit over to here. And I could even, if I wanted to, copy this cow using Control-C and just paste it in over here as well. So now I'd get my peaceful music with some cows going. You can hear the soundscape starting to come together. I could decide that I want to just bring down the gain of my music just to see how that's going to work. So music's going to be a little bit softer now. Okay, and I might decide to add my birds in as well, and my running water. Let's do the running water and see how that works. Okay, so there it is. And you can see it's not quite long enough at this point, the running water, so I may decide to copy it and just reproduce it again. Let's have a listen. Just gonna... And you can see I'm experimenting with the volume at this stage just to get the sounds all working together. And I'm just going to paste in some more running water there. And so I've got a nice soundscape, and I want to add my birds because they were also a part of the soundscape. So I'm going to add them in as well. And let's see how they fare once I've put them into my soundscape. Okay, there are the birds. Let's have a listen. The cow is rather loud. Let's bring it down. Okay, and you get the idea. Now, at this point, I've got my music going to this stage, but I might want to start bringing in some scary, suspenseful music at some point. And so I might decide, for example, to bring in, let's see, this scary suspense. Spooky atmosphere. Let's try this one. There it is. Now, I'm going to have to move this one because it's not going to quite time at that point, but let's see if we can do that. Let's move it towards the end of our peaceful music, and we'll just see how that's going to work. You can see there, if I go to this point here, let's see what happens. Excellent. And now let's bring in our scary suspense music at this point. And of course I'll have to move it because it's going to be... You can see here I'm just really starting to get this to work. Let's have a look now. Shrink that down a bit just so I can see everything here. And I might just bring the gain down a bit there. Let's see how this works at the end. Gonna move. And you get the idea, and I can of course add in my yell at this point and see how that works. And I'll just move that in to here. Let's try it there. And I'll just bring up the volume of that one. Okay, so you can see how easy it is to come up with this really interesting story that's told with sound, and how, I guess, how difficult that is to think about, to think, okay, if I want to tell this story, what sounds am I going to need? What's the story going to sound like? What's going to happen in this story? And how do I just convey that using sounds? What sounds am I going to need? And how do I put them together and mix them up? But this is, of course, high level, higher order thinking that's going to be required to come up with a really compelling, authentic story that's going to be told using sound, the art of sound. And of course, you know, this will lead into some very interesting skills, you know, with students that might end up working in radio, for example, or film, and be involved in the sound aspects of that. So hopefully you found these three technologies that have been demonstrated at the different levels also to be helpful, and think about your own technologies that you might explore in your technology exploration time as part of this course. And hopefully you'll come up with some even more interesting technologies that can really help you and your students.